The history of creation has been tackled in more or less detail in all 3 editions, but 3rd edition in particular has decided to leave the distant past abstract. But what did actually happen in the distant past, as well as before the distant past even became a distant past? The answers may not be canon in 3rd edition, but have there been any answers at all? This is the Pattern Spider, a YouTube channel about role-playing games. This video will go through the metaphysics of time knot, the rise of the primordial enemies of the gods, as well as the dawn of creation. 3 editions of Exalted have been released, and the sources behind most of the content for this video comes from 2nd edition. Now, 3rd edition lore is much different from 2nd edition lore in many ways, and one of 3rd edition's design philosophies is to avoid going into too much detail about metaphysics and the distant past. So, it's very likely that this won't ever be answered in the new edition. I'm making this video with the 2nd edition material anyway, because it's an interesting discussion to talk about the creation of the world, and perhaps even 2nd edition can give some valuable inspiration for the kind of world history you want to give your game. I want to make this disclaimer anyway, because there could come 3rd edition material that contradicts the information in this video. I'm not currently in possession of all 1st edition material either, so I'm not sure if 1st edition has a different take on this part of creation's history than 2nd edition did. All I know is that once there was time knot, when existence was truly timeless. It didn't necessarily come before the current day, because the concepts of before and after were not defined. Some philosophers argue that time knot may not only be the state before beginning, but it could also be the state after the end. But that distinction relies on a creation-born concept of chronology, and this period was not a time, it was time knot. Some believe time knot to have been an infinite region where all things were infinite as well. Nothing was apart because there was nothing from which to be apart. Everything was all at a single point, which was the wholeness of infinity. It was Advaita Rivan who banished time knot. It's the Shinma that defines the principle of separation, and its most important separation was to pull its own ignorance from its awareness in order to understand what it was and recognize itself as separate from things that it wasn't. This made it free from time knot, which also enabled all elements of which time knot consisted to become distinct as well. Some of these elements that Advaita Rivan separated were the other Shinma, each of equal vastness and power to itself. Each Shinma defined a principle of existence that was simple to express but infinite in application. Nirakara defined the principle of shape. Nirguna defined the qualities of existence. Nirvishesha defined the principle of identity. Nirvikalpa defined the principle of communication. Nishkriya defined the principle of conflict. Nirudpadika defined the principles of space and location. Finally, Dharma defined the principles of corrosion, ignorance, and desire. Some philosophers believe that Advaita Rivan was the first of the Shinma, but that belief is ignorant of the dawn of the cosmos. Advaita Rivan didn't create the other Shinma, it simply separated out the ignorance that kept the other Shinma from recognizing their own existences. Neither could it exist before the other Shinma, because all these things existed at the dawn of time. But Advaita Rivan separated the present from the past and the future, which separated time not from time. It also separated the whole of conceivability into reality and not reality, where reality consisted of everything time not had contained, while not reality consisted of the recognition that something could not be. Some believe this not reality to be elsewhere, others believe it is the void. It could be both. What's known though is that everything else, reality, was the endlessness of pure chaos, the primeval wild, where every conceivable reality existed, but now also in time. However, while the concept of time existed, it wasn't yet structured which moment should follow next. Pure chaos was raw essence existing in constant swirling chaos, unshaped and unformed until something gave it shape and form. Time and its importance was advanced by patterns of consciousness that existed in this pure chaos. Advaita Rivan recognized these awarenesses as distinct from the Shinma and from each other. Since they weren't Shinma, they weren't limited solely to the definitions of their principles. They could combine and apply principles as they pleased, which allowed them to conceive of things that the Shinma never could. These minds built shapes and sounds and concepts all too large for creation born to grasp or too small for them to recognize. These minds had no shapes of their own, but they had limits. They were infinitely ever-changing, but remained eternally themselves. There were those who were and weren't content with their existence. Those who weren't tried to steal secrets from the Shinma. They learned to not only create, but to create toward a purpose, to create in cooperation and toward unified goals. They learned how to create in a way that made their creations last, never changing and never coming undone. Those who were content with existence ignored the others because they were content. But meanwhile the uncontent reforged their identities, purged their ancient natures, constructed shapes for one another and became the Primordials, or what would later be known as the enemies of the gods. Those who were content remained as they were, and they became the Raksha. The Primordials and these Raksha warred with each other, because even though the Raksha were content with their existence, they weren't content with what the Primordials had made themselves. They found the strange and static forms that the Primordials had created to imprison their own selves in as something abhorrent. The Primordials wanted a place for themselves where they could shelter from the endless storm of chaos and the warrings of the Raksha. It was this thought and united will that would spring creation into existence. Many Raksha had drawn away from the Primordials and lost sight of their goals and activities. They didn't take notice of what the Primordials were creating before they harnessed a number of Shinma, pulled a section of the wild around themselves, and suddenly disappeared from the Raksha's awarenesses. This disappearance altered the wild and unsettled the Raksha. The Primordials who hadn't disappeared tried to explain to the Raksha what it was they had created. This was a place in existence called Yushan, which contained something wonderful called the Games of Divinity. But the Raksha couldn't conceive of what this meant, and were instead disgusted by the unpleasant change. But the worst had yet to come. The Primordials took an infinitely long fibre of solid reality from this new hidden wonder they had made, and they wrapped this fibre around a section of the wild, turning it into what the Raksha thought was a static abomination. It was the Primordials who are now known as the Joses, Malfias and Sorony who led the effort in this creation. Together with She Who Lives in Her Name, they concluded that the world needed to be, and they began to take on aspects of the Shinma. Cecily, the Endless Desert, advised them on what space the project should inhabit. Autoton, the Great Maker, gave birth to life and art. Adrian, River of All Torments, breathed movement and emotion into the world. Oramus, the dragon beyond the world, decided what was outside and what was in. The Ebon Dragon, Shadow of All Things, declared colors and influenced the invention of fate. Isidoros, the black boar that twists the skies, asserted its distaste for fate but allowed it in exchange for other considerations. The place that became creation itself was the domain of Cytheria the mother and Gaia the world, who birthed creation into existence. This was a realm of solid reality with forged unchanging laws that would eternally bind its form. Here, time always flowed in a single direction. Dropped objects fell downward, plants grew in the ground and animals fed upon those plants. Souls passed from life to death and back to life again. Gods and elementals gave consciousness to the flows of essence, which in turn stabilized its existence and prevented the Raksha from reclaiming it as chaos. Once this world was finished, the Shinma known as Nirakara yielded up an aspect of itself to define its boundaries, mark it out as a definite shape with its own laws and the chronology of time. Creation was formed. This realm was not only disgusting to the Raksha, but it was unsafe for them. All Raksha who tried to pass unprotected into the Primordial's creation were undone, unable to exist there in their natural state. Only those who passed through a certain aspect of Nirakara, known as the Gateway of Sundraprisha, and forged a physical shape for themselves, would have a chance to survive in creation. But even those who could survive only could do so for a time, having to consume essence to keep themselves from deteriorating. That the Primordials could survive unaffected in this world horrified the Raksha even more. The Incarnate and the gods were created to protect and maintain creation, and these sentient races were created to give worship to the Primordials as well as provide ambrosia, which was their meat and drink. Humanity was the weakest of all sentient races, created solely for the purpose of prayer. The Primordials wanted them to pray often and fervently. Giving them a constant fear of death was the incentive they needed to do what the Primordials wanted them to do. Even the gods were offered prayers, since its essence provided power and incentive for the gods to perform their tasks. Humanity was ruled by the Dragon Kings, for example, and they in turn worshipped the unconquered sun, the king of all gods. The Dragon Kings were largely ignored by the Primordials themselves. The Primordials anchored creation in the influences of the Shinma, and they chose 5 Shinma to support the power of their servants. In Dharma, the Shinma of corrosion, ignorance and desire, they rooted the virtue of compassion. In Nirvikalpa, the Shinma of communication, they rooted the virtue of conviction. In Nirvishesha, the Shinma of identity, they rooted temperance. In Nishkriya, the Shinma of conflict, they rooted valor. In Nirguna, the Shinma of existence, they rooted not the virtue but the principle the virtues defined. In existence, the Primordials anchored will. With the gods in their charge, the Primordials could finally retreat from their endless conflict with chaos and play the games of divinity. Creation became a machine of clockwork efficiency. The bureaus of the gods were absolute and each god knew its task. They did their duty for a while, but they'd soon grow discontent and saw themselves as enslaved by the Primordials' will. The gods have been granted will, and will abhors its own absence. Will defies unwilling servitude. From will springs ambition, and from this will blossomed rebellion. The gods could raise no hand against their creators, though, so they had to find another way to overcome the Primordials, their enemies, and they turned their gazes towards humanity. But that's a story for another day. Now, what do people actually know about the origin of creation? Most of it is shrouded in mystery, with some reports pertaining to the origins of the Primordials, Yushan, and creation contained within forbidden and apocryphal texts that are most commonly used in the rites of various Yose cults. The record of first days is a scripture deemed by the gods of Yushan as one of the most blasphemous texts in existence, not only because of its controversial claims, but also because it allegedly perverts the minds of its readers and turns them against the gods, at least according to the gods themselves. This will conclude this video. I chose not to go into more detail about the individual Primordials in this video, but if you're interested in more reading about them, I recommend the 2nd edition Ink Monkeys material that go through much Primordial and Yose information. Do keep in mind though that none of this is canon for 3rd edition, and you should consider everything that's been covered in this video as non-canonical information that was canon in 2nd edition but is so no longer. New material could contradict this information, but it could be even more likely that it won't be covered in any great detail at all. Instead, hopefully this video can provide some context about the dawn of creation that may inspire your own games. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you like what I'm doing and want to see more. Also remember to check out my Patreon where you can access previews of Machineborn, a game I'm writing. I also want to thank everyone for helping me get beyond 100 subscribers. I think we need to set a new goal for 2019 though. Can we pass 500? Probably not, but if you share this video with both your friends and your enemies, I'd greatly appreciate it. Until next time, see you in creation or in the wild, depending on where your stance is after this video.